Hi there, my name's Andy Young and I'm one of the automotive lecturers down at Unitech in Auckland, New Zealand, and welcome to my Andy Mechanic YouTube channel. Now, a couple of days ago, one of my customers brought me a ute and a trailer full of stuff to fix, and amongst his toys were a couple of little quad bikes, and this is one of them. This is a little Suzuki LT50A. Now, I actually owned many quad bikes in the UK, and I did actually buy two of these for my daughters, Charlotte and Eloise. And I think the yellow one was Charlotte's and the red one was Eloise's, and they were good little bikes, but to be perfectly honest, they weren't as well built as Ben's LT50, the older version that had no suspension. That thing ran forever. So it was definitely a demise in Suzuki's quality on their kids' quad bikes. Once we got into early 90s, I would say it would be. Bit of a shame, Suzuki, unfortunately. Okay, so as with many kids' quads, they tend to get parked up and left for months on end, and then when you want to use it, it won't start. And that's exactly the problem with this bike. So I thought, hey, this will make a great video, and it might help quite a few people out. This is basically what you need to do when you've not been using your little kid's quad bike, or any quad bike really, and it would also apply to motorcycles. If you haven't used them for a while, and this is basically the procedure that we would go through in the bike shop to get these machines up and running. And the first thing you need to do is drain all the fuel out of the fuel tank and the carburetor, because that fuel has gone stale. It's gone off, and the bike definitely will not start with that fuel on board. What you should also do, if the bike's got a battery, put the battery on charge for a good 24 hours. And if it takes a charge, then great, all fixed, and you're back in action with the battery. Otherwise, if it doesn't take a charge, you're going to need to go out and buy a new battery, because batteries hate being stood doing nothing. When they go flat, then they start to corrode inside on the plates, and then the chemical reaction doesn't work, doesn't happen, and you don't get an output. Plus, they won't take a charge either, so you need to buy a new one. Batteries don't like being stood. So, without further ado, let's head over to the bike, and I'm going to drain all the fuel out of the fuel tank and the carb. We'll pull the battery off, stick that on charge, and then hopefully by tomorrow, after I've done all the rest of the work that I'm going to show you, we can get this thing fired up. Here we go. Okay, well, the first thing we need to do is we've got to be able to access the engine and the carburetor. So basically, let's get the seat taken off, and these two big plastic, horrible, half falling off footboards as well. The seat's dead easy, little clip at the back. Most of the quad bikes are pretty much the same, whether the Suzuki or Chinese or whatever. Toolkits and a mini toolkit, get rid of those. Now, these footboards are held on with some plastic clips and some M6 bolts, which are a 10mm socket size. So I'm going to whip those off next. Here we go. Right, now obviously because all these other fasteners are broken, this can come straight off, but you should be removing both of these, which are also, these are a machine screw with a Phillips head to it, 10mm nut at the back, but these plastics are really bad on these bikes. Very brittle, and all these clips have just popped off as well. And you can see here, look, a lot of the little housings on the plastics have cracked, so I'll be replacing those with nuts and bolts later on. Now, some of these clips are a bit more intact, so we'll have to undo those as well. I'll get these bottom ones down first. It's these kind of jobs that usually end up being for the apprentice in the bike shop. All the mechanics just, well, they don't want to waste their time doing trivial repairs like this, unfortunately. They'd much rather be working on the big bikes. Much more fun. You know, when it comes to kids quads as well, it's the same labour rate whether you're fixing a Yamaha R1 or whether you're fixing a little kids quad. So it ends up quite often being a bit too expensive to take these to your local bike shop and get them fixed. And there's no reason why you can't get these things up and running yourself, if providing it's just a problem with the bike being stood for so long, you know. It's normally just a fuel issue. Right, get rid of those. Cool. Okay, now on this little Suzuki, the carburettor is located just here on the right hand side of the engine. Now at this point in time, we're not going to take the carburettor off. What we are going to do is drain the fuel from it. This is sort of the first stage of getting the bike up and running. It may be, if the bike's been stood a very long time, we'll need to take the carb off and clean it out. But fingers crossed, we won't need to do that. Now, before we go any further, if you just look at the instructions on the fuel tap, it does vary from bike to bike. But on this particular Suzuki, on the LT50A, it's got 3 positions. It's got prime to the left at 9 o'clock and prime to 3 o'clock. Well, they're both exactly the same positions. And down at 6 o'clock, it's got the on position. Now, what that means is this fuel tap will allow fuel to flow when the engine's not running in either of the 2 prime positions. But it will only allow fuel to flow when the engine's running if it's in the on position. So there isn't really what we'd call the traditional off. But what you need to do at this point in time is leave the fuel tap in the on position. We don't want fuel flowing from the fuel tank down to the carburettor at the moment. Okay, so back round to the right hand side of the bike, you've got your carburettor. Now, this is the float bowl just down here, and you'll usually see a little drain pipe coming from the float bowl and some kind of brass or steel screw at the furthest down point of the float bowl. And that's the drain screw for the float bowl. Now, sometimes it's a flat, sometimes it's a posi, sometimes it's an Allen key. It varies from bike to bike. But grab yourself a container. Now, the reason why we're using a container is we want to see what colour that fuel is when it comes out. So stick it under the drain pipe and then just crack that off. Oh, look at, do you see that? We have a loose carburettor to fix that as well, won't we? Right, so let's undo that. Oh yeah, okay, well the fuel isn't coming out of the drain pipe. There's another fault. It's running out of the screw. Very strange. Okay, so we'll just give that a minute or two to drain out. Looks like we're taking the carburettor off this bike. Well, that's about it. Okay, so we can tighten that back up again. And then the next job is to take off the filler pipe from the fuel tank. Come on, screw, get in there. There we are, right. So we'll just nip that up for now. And this is the pipe here that runs from the fuel tank. So we're going to unclip that and run an extra hose down to a drain. Now there's probably a couple of litres of fuel in this fuel tank, so I need to get a full-size can for that. Okay, get that little clip taken off. Let's ease that pipe off. Now again, whilst you're doing this, just check the pipe's not perished or cracked. If it is, you want to be replacing it. Here in New Zealand, these fuel lines tend to get pretty perished pretty quick. Now there shouldn't be any fuel, maybe a little tiny bit, but there shouldn't be any real fuel flow from that pipe, until we turn the fuel tap to prime. Good. Okay, just a little tiny dribble, which is what we wanted. Right, time for a can. Now, is that going to be long enough? I'm going to squidge that into there, look. Oh, there we go, look at that. Perfect. Right, so we'll set that off draining. So I'm going to turn the tap to prime now. And we should see fuel coming out. And there we go. Cool. So we'll leave that to drain out for, well, as long as it takes, I suppose. Now, it does help if you remove the fuel cap. That can speed things up a little bit. Now, I made a slight error on this particular bike. My memory must be failing me. But the Suzuki LT50A doesn't have electric start. It doesn't have a battery. Sorry. So on this particular bike, there's no need to take the battery out, because there isn't one. It's only got a pull start, which I suppose makes it a bit more reliable when it comes to starting the bike after it's been stood for some time. I know the second cord that I've got to do is a Polaris, and that definitely does have a battery. So you can watch that video on doing that one. Now, So we've drained all the old fuel out of the fuel tank. That's currently draining now, and we've drained the fuel out of the float bowl. Now it's usual for the fuel in the float bowl to go what we call off first. It tends to lose its flammability really quickly. So you might just get away with just draining the carb and then putting the screw back in again, letting fresh fuel from the fuel tank run into the carb, and then try and start it. Sometimes that works, but the bike, it may start, but it probably will still cough and splutter a little bit and not be too happy, especially if it's been stood for more than a couple of weeks. It's always best to put fresh fuel straight in, and that eliminates, the whole problem of fuel. If you've still got an issue with the bike not running correctly, then you know it's not a fuel problem as regards fuel quality. It could be a fuel supply problem, it could be a blocked jet in the carburetor, sure. It could also be a fouled spark plug, the bike has been stood for quite some time, or maybe even a blocked air filter. All these things you've got to check for. Little rodents and stuff have a habit of finding air filter boxes and making little nests in there. And also down the exhaust as well, you get little mice that go down the exhaust and then they die. And they block the exhaust up, and if the fumes can't get out, nothing can get in and the bike won't run. All sorts of crazy problems that you come across on these sort of things. Okay, well I think it's time now to put some fresh fuel in this bike and see if it's going to start for us. Here we go. Now I think before we just put the fresh fuel in, we need to make damn sure that that carburetor is set level, otherwise it's going to leak fuel on the float bowl, and we've got a few options here, but that's about level there. Also make sure it's all the way up on the intake manifold, that tiny little pipe, which it is, and it's level. So we'll just tighten up, get rid of the choke. I'm just going to tighten up that screw there, and that should lock it into position. There we go, that's a lot better. Okay, and it's pretty much finished draining, and the fuel looks terrible. Let me show you. Blink, there we go, right. Okay, so this is what came out of the fuel tank. And I have a sneaky suspicion that somebody has been putting two-stroke oil in with the petrol in the fuel tank. But you don't do that on this bike. If you look over here, it's got a separate oil tank. That's where the two-stroke oil goes. Yes, it's red, look, and the petrol's red. So somebody's been sort of double mixing. They've been putting oil in the two-stroke tank and in the fuel tank, which means that this bike is going to be running really, really oily. And no doubt it's going to foul up spark plugs. Okay, so we're just going to pop that hose back on there. Put the clip back on again. All pretty simple stuff, isn't it? Put it round to one side so that we catch the hand on it. There we go. Right, fresh petrol. Now we're still in the prime position on the fuel tap, so this should prime straight down, flow straight down to the carburetor. So the float bowl should be nice and full when we try and start the bike. Now these things don't hold that much fuel, to be honest, so don't want to overflow it. There we go. Now it's a good idea at this point in time just to slacken that screw off again and just double check we've got fresh fuel flow to the carb. That tells you that your fuel tap's working properly. Oh, there we go, look, much cleaner petrol coming through there now. That's excellent. Right, so we'll lock that off. And there's one more thing I have to do to this bike before I can start it, because I don't have any ignition keys. Customers like to set me a challenge, don't they? Now, because I haven't got any ignition keys, I'm going to need to pop that ignition barrel out and just join the two wires together. I'm going to hotwire the quad bike. Terrible really, isn't it? Bit of extra work. But they couldn't find the keys for this one, so such is life. Not going to slow me down for fixing it. And this clip's broken, but this one isn't, so I'll pop that one apart of the way. these fasteners are terrible, they're so brittle. Now, coming out of the ignition barrel on this bike are just 2 wires. Well, in fact, it's not even connected. What's going on there? Okay, I want to do a quick test on this ignition barrel first, because I'm not entirely sure whether when it's in the on position it connects these 2 wires or if it disconnects these 2 wires, and we can check that with a multimeter. Okay, so currently the ignition barrel is in the off position, so I'm hoping it's going to be open circuit, i.e. no continuity in that position. Okay, so off, no continuity, so we shouldn't get a beep. Oh, we do. I had a hunch. A bit corroded, unfortunately. So another go. I've lost the little pointer on the end of that one, that's why it's so hard to hold in there. Maybe I should grind a new one on there. Okay, well, there's nothing going on there at the moment. So these go closed circuit to these switches when you turn the ignition on. Now that isn't always the case on these non-battery motorcycles and quad bikes. Sometimes they just put the coil to ground, just like the engine cut-off switch does normally. Okay, well, just a quick check. Okay, cool. Well, that's a pretty much verification that these 2 wires are connected when the ignition key is in the on position. Cool. So we're going to need to join those 2 wires together on the loom. Okay, so the wires on the loom end are these 2 here, look. So I'll make a little bridging wire and pop it in there, and then hopefully that will then allow us to get a spark, and this bike's going to start. Okay, so just poking those 2 wires up through the top, so it's a bit easy to get to. There we go. And we've got a black with a white tracer and a black with a yellow tracer. I'm just going to connect those 2 together with a little bridging wire that I made. It's only a temporary fix until they find the keys, but I mean it hasn't got a battery, so it's not going to go flat if they leave the ignition turned on. Cool. In fact, yeah, that'll work. Let's just put one of those through there, look, and that'll hold it up out of the way. Great stuff. Okay, well, we should now have a spark, should have good fuel, fingers crossed, it's going to start. Okay, make sure you're in the run position, which is the button out on this one. And I think from memory you've got to pull the brake in to start it. You need a bit of choke, so choke down. Doesn't sound very happy, does it? Okay, let's see if we've got a spark. Okay, so the spark plug is just down here in front of the engine, and you've got a spark plug cap to take off. Now when you're taking the cap off, make sure you don't pull on the wire. That's really important. The HTLE doesn't like that kind of stuff. So have a look inside the cap. Well, it looks pretty clean, no corrosion, that's good. Stick that up there out of the way. And then we're going to take the spark plug out, just to have a look. See what sort of condition that's in. Now if it's wet, then there's fuel getting through. Oh, it is wet. Great. So that tells us we're getting fuel into the combustion chamber. So maybe it is a spark problem. Right. Let's put the spark plug back in the cap. This is where Andy gets a shock. There we go. And now we're going to hold it on the side of the engine. And we're going to turn the LED flash off, the light, and hopefully we'll see a spark. Now I've just put a zip tie on that brake lever to hold it in, so we've got engagement to the pull start mechanism. Make sure you've got a nice good ground, and then it shouldn't take a lot. Just pull up on the well, no spark. That's why it doesn't run. Now, just before I go any further, I'm going to just try it again with these two wires disconnected, because that's how we found it on the bike, don't forget. Okay, and if it sparks now, we know there's a fault with the ignition barrel. Okay, let's try again. Time to shock Andy. So make sure you get a good ground. We've disconnected the two wires that go to the ignition barrel now. And can you see that okay? Yeah, I think you can. Right, this is where I'm definitely going to get a shock here, I'm sure of it. There you go, we've got a spark. Okay, I'm going to give the spark plug a bit of a clean up before I put it back in. And that plug gap looks a little bit too small to me. There we go. So that's the spark plug all cleaned up, and I've also set the plug gap to 0.9 of a mil. Right, let's get it popped back in. Well, we'll try for another spark. Let's see how good the spark is now. Right, there we go. Okay, time for another shock. Well, that looks better to me, and it's happening just in the right place too. It was a bit further back before. Great. Stick that back in. See if we can get this puppy fired up. Now remember not to over tighten these, especially when it's a spark plug that's already been out once, because the crush wash is already crushed. Okay, is that going to work? No, on this side. There we go. Make sure your cap goes on properly. There we are. Right, let's give it a go. So, choke is on. Run switch is in the on position. Let's give it a go. Right. Oh yeah. There we go. That was with the choke turned off. Okay, well it's such a hot day down here that it wanted to start with the choke off. It's fair enough. Plus, don't forget we tried to start it earlier on. There was lots of extra fuel in the combustion chamber, which was making the mixture a bit too rich. But now it's running just fine. But we also found another problem. Now this isn't directly related to this video, but the problem is this ignition barrel. This barrel was giving us open circuit in the off position, so you'd assume it would give you a closed circuit in the on position, because it's got to change state. Otherwise, there's no point in it existing on the bike. So we got open circuit in the off, but we also know that those two wires need to be open circuit in the on position for the bike to run, to give us a spark. So there's something wrong with this ignition switch. It's not giving us closed circuit in the off position. And to prove that, if I connect those two wires now on the bike, the engine should stop. And that's what should be happening when this ignition switch is turned to the off position. Let's find out. Hurrah! Okay, so let's investigate inside this switch. Now fortunately, it's got 4 little screws, so let's see what's inside and see what's going on. Okay. I suppose the only real reason why you want the ignition switch on this bike is to stop somebody from stealing the machine, but they really are a kind of sort of pick up and carry kind of quad bike, aren't they? Very thievable. But if we can fix this, we'll fix it. If we can't, then we'll just tell the customer he needs a new one. And you can decide whether we should order one or not. Okay, now, as with most ignition barrels, once you get into them, there tends to be springs and little ball bearings and all sorts. This should be pretty simple, but we don't want anything to fly away. Okay, well, there we go. It's pretty complicated with something that's got 2 wires coming out of it. Right, and yeah, looks like it's in the right position. And it doesn't look too corroded, and that looks like it's making contact. So let's pop that down there. And we can do a little continuity test to see which of these two connectors, and they are quite badly corroded, aren't they? Which ones go where, and then we can work out what's happening with the ignition. So in the on position we should be open circuit. In the off position we should be closed circuit. So realistically, in the on position, nothing should be happening in here. There shouldn't be any link between any of these two wires or contact points. Right, stick it in the vise, find out what's going on. Okay, so just grab our meter. Use this one this time, I think. Continuity, so we'll have a beep whenever there's something connecting. It should be good. Right, quick test. There we go. And all I want to do is find out which of these 5 contact points relate to these 2 wires. So we'll go for the black with the yellow tracer first. Black wire, yellow tracer. Oh, there you go. So that's that one there, look. Okay. And none of the others. Looks like this ignition switch has a lot more contacts than it really needs, so it's obviously used for other stuff, other different kinds of bikes. Okay, and I'm guessing then that if we connect that one onto there, that should be that pin there. It is. Okay, well, in the off position, those two should be connecting, and they weren't. It was giving us open circuit, so maybe they're just a bit dirty. Okay, let's give them a clean. Okay, I reckon just a little bit of wet and dry sandpaper is going to do that a trick. Okay, so it's just these 2 contacts here we're bothered about. Everything else is irrelevant. Ooh, looking good. Okay, that'll do. Right, and then we'll just give these in here a little bit of a clean up as well, just to be on the safe side. Then maybe when they find the key, everything will work just fine. Okay, so we're in the off position at the moment, and off should give us continuity, so it must go that way around the switch. It's got a little rubber seal around there and everything. Well done, Suzuki. Okay, we'll stick that back in there again and put it back together. And then we should be getting continuity between those 2 wires now. Let's hope. Okay, let's try it. No broken wires, is there? No. Okay, let's just stick it back in the vise just to hold it. And quick test. Yep. And let's see if we get continuity this time. And we do. No, they're not touching, it's alright. Perfect. So we've now fixed that switch. Great. Okay, so basically we've got the bike up and running, and we found some faults, didn't we? You know, we found that the fuel was stale, and we also found a fault with the ignition switch, and we found a fault with the spark plug too. It was fouled up, and the spark plug gap was too small. Yeah. Oh, and we found that the ignition barrel was disconnected for some strange reason. Odd, isn't it? When it would have run without continuity. It only stops the engine when continuity goes between those 2 wires for the off position. What else is that you should do really? Well, you should clean the air filter out as a matter of practice. You know, you're servicing the bike. It probably isn't going to get done when the kids are riding it because they want to ride it all the time. So, you know, clean it out in some air filter cleaner, probably a foam filter. Give it a clean out and then put a very light amount of air filter oil on there. Don't over oil it because the bike will not start. What else? Well, oil the chain, check the tyre pressures, that kind of thing. But this particular video was about getting the bike, the engine, started. And hopefully you found it helpful. My name's Andy Young and I'm one of the automotive lecturers down at Unitec in Auckland, New Zealand. And you've been watching my Andy Mechanic YouTube channel. Now, if you found this video helpful, then why not subscribe to the channel? Click on subscribe, you'll see a little gear icon turn up. You can click the gear icon and then you'll see a little box that you can tick and that will turn on notifications. And that way our friends down at YouTube will send you an email whenever I upload any new videos. And I do quite a few videos on ATVs, motorcycles, car repairs, and some fabrication work too. So you might find some of the other videos helpful. You'll also find me on Facebook, Instagram, Google+, and Twitter, and feel free to communicate through any of those portals. However, I would ask, if you don't mind, use the YouTube comments as your first point of contact. And that way, if I answer the question there and then anybody else watching the video that has the same question will see the answer and they'll be able to crack on and get their bike fixed straight away. They won't have to wait for me to get back to them. I do my best, but I am a very busy chap, so if I haven't replied to you, then just bear with me, I'll do what I can. But just bear in mind, I don't know everything. So anybody else out there that reads your question, feel free to dib in there and provide some feedback as well, because this is a collaboration kind of thing that I'm trying to set up. Okay, well, that's about it. That's one quad down, and I have another one to do, so watch out for the next video. Cheers, crew. Over and out.